The Fellwing hit the harbor at dawn, and every person on the docks ran. Nara didn't run. She was halfway up a cargo crane ladder when the creature came out of the river mist, low and fast, a silhouette of bent spines and membrane wings that made no sound until the wind hit the warehouse walls and set every loose rope on the pier snapping taut. She gripped the ladder rung and pressed flat against the iron and watched it pass beneath her, maybe 4 meters of gray-scaled body, the wingspread just under 8, skimming the water so close the wingtips left trails in the surface like a pair of dragged fingers. It was not what the hunter boards described. The notices posted along the harbor road called it a rogue, unpredictable, vicious. 3 fishing skiffs lost in the past month to something that struck at night and left nothing. Nara had read those notices the way she read everything, carefully, skeptically, and she had noted that not one of them described an actual attack on a person. 3 skiffs. No bodies recovered. No witnesses who'd seen it strike. Just wreckage in the water and a shape people had seen in the distance and the fear that came from not knowing. The Fellwing angled toward the eastern dock and set down hard on the loading platform her crew used for the grain barges. The impact shook the planking loud enough that she felt it through the ladder's iron feet 20 meters away. The dragon folded its wings, not smoothly, the left trailing wider than the right before the membrane pulled back, and turned its head toward the warehouse doors. Looking for cover, she realized, not attacking, looking for cover. The hunting party came out of the morning fog 4 minutes later, 3 fast skiffs with 6 men per boat, and the pneumatic launchers they used for sealing choke nets over river channels. She'd seen the launchers used on injured river beasts. At short range, into a wing membrane, they didn't just stop a creature. They destroyed it. The Fellwing heard the skiffs. Its head swung low and the spines along the back of its neck flattened. The same thing the river birds did when they were afraid, though on a creature this size the gesture looked more like a sword being sheathed. It pressed back against the warehouse wall, and Nara saw for the first time that the left wing was wrong. Not just reluctant. There was a long, ragged tear across the upper membrane, maybe 40 centimeters, dark at the edges where it had tried to dry and couldn't. An old wound. Weeks old at least, and never given time to heal because it had never been allowed to rest. She climbed down the ladder. She didn't decide to do it exactly. That was the way she thought about it afterward when the questions came. She had not made a calculation or a plan. She climbed down because she was closer to the loading platform than the hunting boats were, and because the thought that she could do something and chose not to made her chest feel hollow. That was all. The dock boss, Lin, was shouting at her from across the channel, a wordless warning bellow that she acknowledged with a raised fist and ignored. She crossed the rope bridge over the South Channel at a walk, fast enough to matter, slow enough not to startle anything. The Fellwing had seen her before she reached the far side. It tracked her the whole way, head low, neck pulled back, one eye steady and amber. She stopped at the foot of the platform and held still. "Easy," she said. The same flat, ordinary words she'd used on trapped river birds and dock cats, and one memorable occasion, a river bull that had wedged itself between 2 mooring posts. The word wasn't magic. The tone was everything, no drama, no fear, no pitch change. Just a voice that said, "I am aware of you and I am not moving fast." The dragon didn't move. She looked at the wing openly. At this distance she could see the tear more clearly. It ran through 2 layers of membrane, had separated partway at the leading edge, and was still fresh enough at one end to be seeping. Whatever had caused it had caught the creature mid-flight. A net, she guessed. One of the hunter guilds worked the river channels with choke nets, and sometimes a catch broke free with exactly this kind of damage. "They're going to net you again," she said, "or worse." The skiffs were rounding the south bend. She could hear the hum of the launchers warming up. "The platform doors are open. If you want the warehouse, take it." The dragon looked at her, looked at the open warehouse doors, looked back at her. She stepped aside and turned so that she was facing the approaching boats with her back to the Fellwing. not presenting her back to a creature that frightened her. She'd stopped being frightened somewhere on the rope bridge. She wasn't sure when, but removing herself from between the dragon and the door. The platform planking shook once, a sound like a heavy cart rolling, and she felt the wash of displaced air as the wings partly opened and folded again. Then the warehouse doors swung inward on their hinge spring, and the shadow behind her was gone. Emlen's skiff reached the platform at the same moment the lead hunter jumped the rail and landed on the dock boards. His name was Jorath, and he was the kind of man who kept score. He had a launcher cradled in one arm and an expression that said he'd already spent the reward in his head. "Where's the beast?" he said. Nara looked at him. "What beast?" Jorath looked at the warehouse doors, at the scuff marks on the platform boards, at her. "Don't," he said. "I don't know what you saw from the river," she said, "but I've been up that crane all morning. Nothing came down here." It was the first outright lie she had told since she was 11. It sat in her mouth with less guilt than she expected. Jorath was not a stupid man. He looked at the warehouse, calculated the odds of forcing entry against dock authority rules that even hunter licenses didn't override, and recalculated when Emlen arrived at her shoulder, making his displeasure audible. The dock boss had no love for rogue creatures, but he had significant love for his bonded warehouse and the cargo it contained, and the notion of armed men with pneumatic launchers walking through his inventory while looking for something that could set the whole thing alight made him predictably uncooperative. The hunters worked the river. The docks were Emlen's ground. It took 30 minutes. Jorath's skiff eventually pushed off. Nara watched it go from the platform and felt the peculiar quiet of something not yet finished. She went into the warehouse at noon, when the dock workers had gone to the midday break, and the building held only shadow and the smell of river grain and cut wood. She took a lamp in and then didn't need it because the upper clear-story windows let in enough noon light to show her the far corner. The fellwing was curled against the stacked grain crates. Not hiding, its head was up, tracking her from the moment she entered, the amber eye steady. The wing was folded, and at this distance in this light she could see the membrane shivering slightly at the torn edge, not from cold, from effort. It was holding the wing still by choice, the way an injured person held an arm in a position that didn't hurt. Nara set the lamp down. She went to the dock foreman's cabinet, which held the emergency kit that Emlen had stocked 3 years ago when a barge worker lost 2 fingers to a winch cable, and he'd had to send a runner a kilometer for supplies. She found the wound seal pack, the wide bandage roll, the sealant compound that set hard in open air. She had used it on rope burns and dock lacerations for 2 years. She had never used it on a wing membrane. She pulled a crate to the center of the floor, sat on it, and opened the kit on the boards in front of her. The fellwing watched. She didn't approach. She sat there, sorted through the kit, set the sealant compound on the floor where the light hit it. Let the light show what she was doing. Let time pass. The dragon uncurled 20 minutes later. It crossed the floor in 4 careful steps, the damaged wing held fractionally higher than the right, and stopped 2 meters from her crate. Its head came down slowly, level with her chest, and the amber eye studied the open kit with what she could only describe as attention. "I can seal it," she said, "if you let me." The eye moved to her face. "I won't get it perfect. I've never done a wing before, but the compound stops the bleeding and lets the membrane knit." She picked up the sealant tube. She held it where the eye could see it. She did not move toward the dragon. The silence in the warehouse was the particular silence of a decision being made. She recognized it the way she recognized tides. You couldn't see the turn, only feel the moment when something that was moving one way began, infinitesimally, to move another. The fellwing's head came lower. The neck curved not down but sideways, angling the damaged wing toward her at a slight, deliberate tilt. Nara moved slowly. She stood, crossed the 2 meters, and reached the wing's leading edge without the dragon retreating a centimeter. Up close, the scales were not gray but a dark river green with gray overtones, each one fitting the next with a precision that made her mechanic's instinct appreciate them even as her hands were already reading the damaged area. The tear was worse than she'd thought from a distance. The inner layer of membrane was compromised, not just the outer. 2 tears, actually, one older and one recent. The recent one was still bleeding in a thin seep. She worked without speaking. The sealant went on in layers, the way the compound's instructions said, and she used the wide bandage as a backing along the leading edge where the membrane had started to separate from the leading strut. Her hands were grain dust dirty and calloused, and she kept them flat and even and never grabbed. The fellwing held perfectly still. Its breathing was even and deliberate, the chest expanding and contracting in a slow rhythm that she found herself unconsciously matching. It took 40 minutes. When she stepped back, the wing's leading edge was sealed, and the tear was closed, and the membrane, where she had worked, looked less like something trying to fall apart and more like something holding. The fellwing raised the wing, testing, not extending, just a degree of movement, feeling the new tension of the sealant where the old pain had been. The amber eye came back to her. Nara sat back on her crate. Her hands were shaking very slightly now that the work was done. "You'll need a week before you fly on it," she said. "Less if you're stubborn, but you'll reopen it if you push." The dragon's head tilted. The gesture was so precisely like a question that she almost answered it before catching herself. It stayed the rest of that day. She brought water from the dock pump in a cargo bucket, which the creature ignored and then, after an interval of several minutes, didn't. The next morning it was still there. She came in with the first light and found it awake and watching the clerestory windows, tracking the angle of the dawn light with that complete animal attention. She spent the morning working on the grain barge manifest at the foreman's desk in the corner, the fell wing in its far corner, and the warehouse held a quality of quiet that she didn't have a good word for. Occupied, she thought. The way a room was occupied when 2 people in it didn't need to talk. The hunters came back on the 4th day. Different men, same guild, and this time with a dock magistrate who had enough authority to compel access. Nara stood at the warehouse doors and the fellwing was not there. She had opened the river-facing cargo hatch at first light without telling it why, and it had been gone by the time Joreth's replacement arrived. Whether it had understood her intent or simply sensed the shift in her posture, she didn't know. It was gone. What came in its place, that same afternoon, was the water. She was on the loading platform, checking a grain barge's draft lines in the lower harbor, when the river downstream of the dock stilled. Not the ordinary stillness of a slack current. Something stilled it, displacement from below, something vast moving slowly up the channel. The water broke in a long, slow fold, and what rose from it was not a wave but a shape. The creature that surfaced was 6 times the size of the fellwing. Its scales were the deep brown-green of river silt dried in sunlight, each one the width of Nara's palm. Its head cleared the water in stages: chin, jaw, eye ridge, and the eye, when it broke the surface, was amber like the fellwings but with the depth that living a very long time put in things. Ancient. That was the word. Not old in the way that meant tired. Old in the way that meant the world had been different when it was young. It looked at the dock, at the warehouse, at her. Nara did not run. She set down the draft line and stood at the edge of the platform and looked back. The old dragon made a sound, low, not loud, felt more in the chest than heard. Not a growl, not a summons. Something more like an acknowledgement. She didn't know what she was being acknowledged for exactly. For not running. For the sealant and the bucket of water and the opened cargo hatch. For standing here now and looking back without a weapon in her hand. All of it, maybe. None of it was a deliberate act of courage. It was just what the situation had called for, and she had answered. The ancient fellwing held her gaze for a long moment, that great eye steady, and then it sank. The river swallowed it in the same slow fold it had risen from. The water closed. The current resumed. The harbor around her was silent. She became aware that every dock worker within sight had stopped working and was staring at the water, at her, at the space between. Emlen came to stand beside her. He was quiet for once. He looked at the river and then at her. "What was that?" he said. Nara watched the current run south toward the sea, the way it always had, the way it would long after both of them were gone. "It was a thank you," she said. She picked up the draft line and went back to work.